Hi, this is KEV Roberts, the host of Northern Soul Time, and I am honoured to be in the company of one of the pioneers of 60s soul, the British ambassador of soul music, in fact, David Nathan. How are you, David?
I'm great. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on the first episode to talk about Northern Soul and the origins with Soul City and how that all came about. The real story, no mythologies, just truth.
I've got a Soul City single in my hands.
Yes.
Here, Major Lance The Beat,
Yes.
which when I was at school, I was buying that single. Soul City, of course, released music that ostensibly was the music you believed in, that you could sell, be proud of.
Yes.
But you weren't quite ready for hordes of young kids from the north of England to come hurtling down, asking you for some of the songs that you released.
Yes, yes.
So they became Northern Soul hits, but they weren't. That wasn't your intention, was it?
Not really, Kev. To give a little more history to it, Soul City as a record shop began in a conversation, just so people know a little bit about the history of how this all came about. So after Dave Godin had been running the Tamil Emotional Appreciation Society, he started something else called the Friends of Rhythm and Blues Society, which was called FARBS. That was the next part of his journey, and he enlisted my support for that. At that time, I met him originally because I was the founder of the Nina Simone Appreciation Society, and he was the one who gave me the blessing, in a sense, because he was like the godfather of all the fan clubs. Which were at 64, 65, around that time period. So if you wanted to start a fan club, you didn't have to go to get his permission, but it was nice to have him on board. By then, I had started to get into my own journey of soul music, so to speak. And at some point, Dave realized that what he was doing with the Friends of Rhythm and Blues Society and Rhythm and Soul USA was not really going the way he'd like it to have gone. So I remember we sat in his study in Bexley Heath, 139 Church Road, and he said, "Well, I've got this idea." He said, "Well, why don't we? You have the experience of having, ordered records. You know how to do all that part of it, and you know how to do all that." And says, "So why don't we get some money together to start a record shop?" Okay. Well, that sounds interesting. I don't have much to put into it, but I do have the knowledge, because I knew the mechanics of how to. It wasn't just you could just say, "Well, I'm going to open a record shop and the records are going to show up." So then also I had a love for the music. I've been developing a love for the music too. So basically, that's how it came about. There's a little story I'd like to tell because it's a real story and people don't know this, and I think it should be told publicly, Kev. Okay. So what happened? We have to. He had the magazine still, Rhythm and Soul USA, and we had to raise money. So there was a book called the Schwann Catalog. It's spelled SHWANN, and they updated it every now and again from America, and it had all the LPs listed that were out at the time. So we went through it, and we chose about 10 or 12 items. I remember what the Major Lance LP called. I think it was the LP
on OK.
Yes. Yeah. And then there was Artistics, an LP by the Artistics. We picked certain ones that would not release it in Britain, and we said we're going to get those imports. Yeah. And of course, we told people send in your postal orders. Yeah. Yeah.
Stamped addressed envelope.
Exactly. SAE. Stamped addressed envelope. Right. And so you get these orders in, and of course you put the money in the bank, so to speak, and then the problem was we didn't have the records. We didn't even have a record shop, but we were telling people get them in 6 to 8 weeks from now because So here's what happens. So I was one who has to pick up the phone when the customers was Dave's phone number at home. Well, I ordered it 10 weeks. I ordered it. I haven't got my record yet. So oh no, it's on the way. Big demand. It was all made up, right. And then finally. Dave got some funding from a friend of his who he'd worked with as a florist, and they gave him the funding to be able to start the record shop. Right. And that was originally in Deptford.
Right.
And so what happened was that's when we started to fulfill the orders of the people who set the money in.
Yeah.
But the point being, that's how we
All's
started.
well that ends well.
Well, yeah, little bumps on the road.
When were you aware that there was something happening, that we got our own clubs in Manchester and Nottingham and other places? Because you were releasing music because you believed in it, and also you're in the capital, so you'd have an audience anyway for these records. But some of your titles exploded in the North.
Yes, that's true.
In particular, The Right Track, Billy Butler, The Beat, Major Lance, and Nothing Could Stop Me, Gene Chandler, because those were the first three I bought.
Really?
I didn't buy Greasy Billy Preston. I didn't buy Happy Chatter, the Soul City Executives. Sorry, mate.
That's all right, don't worry.
But I played to death on my mum's radiogram, right Track and Nothing Could Stop Me. Yeah. I mean, they were huge, weren't they?
Yes. Well, to answer your question, I have to jump back a bit to get to that, because when after the record shop was in Deptford, then we moved to Monmouth Street in the West End. Yeah. And that's really where the whole phenomenon of people coming from the North on Saturdays to support their football clubs. That's really the origins of it. The thing that made Soul City different from the other record shops, so there are other record shops that sold R&B, of course, but that made it really different is that we had imports. We imported records, probably every week. To begin with, it wasn't every week. And we had these people in Florida, Mr. and Mrs. Shapiro. And the instruction was, send us some new releases, even on little labels we might not know about.
Yeah.
But there were certain labels that we knew were the ones that would always have, could be relied on to produce new records. So we had Atlantic, we had OK, which was, of course, part of the whole CBS Columbia network.
Yes.
OK Brunswick. So certain labels, we didn't care who the artist was.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, we knew certain artists' name value, but we just said, send us a couple of copies of everything. So we get the big shipment. David goes to the airport, get this paperwork out. We get the shipment. And then and a lot of times we look up and they don't even know the labels. I mean, I can remember certain labels, they stay in my mind. There's a label called Minaret. There was Merewood, all these labels that were not massive. Yeah. In terms of, they certainly weren't available in Britain. They weren't imported in any great quantity in Britain at that point, and that was what makes Soul City different.
Well, certainly around that time, 1968, I remember very distinctly as Northern Soul, although it wasn't dubbed Northern Soul in 1968, the music that was... That's right. I was familiar with in the North, but it was probably being played in London as well. I'm thinking about Harlem Shuffle from Bob and Earl, Going to a Happening, Tommy Neal, these kind of things. I think they were just generally underground R&B songs, weren't they?
Yes, yes.
But obviously they manifested into becoming Northern Soul records. But hearing them on the radio for the first time. There's a lot of them, wasn't there? I mean, Stopper on Sight. A lot of people take that for granted by Edwin Starr.
Yes.
But it came out in 66 and it didn't sell.
No.
But they reissued it with a headline news on the flip.
That's right.
And there you've got a chart here, which again was strange because Radio 1, which was a new pop station, and every teenager, and I was a teenager then,
me too, by the way.
Was listening to, the hits of the day, See Emily Play, Pink Floyd, Everlasting Love, The Love Affair. And then all of a sudden, someone like Tony Blackburn would crop up and play Nothing Could Stop Me, Gene Chandler.
Which, by the way, was our first hit. So just to go on, to say that, to go back again to the records themselves, were imports. They were imports. So the Beat and Major Lance were amongst they were imports firstly. They were not, before they got released, they were imports. We got on OK. The other one, of course, which I think we may mention is Sandy Sheldon. That was an import on OK before, we didn't actually release it in our Soul City. But the label, so the real history of it is we were importing records and then we just played them in the shop. And then the thing of the people coming in from the North on Saturdays, we would just be playing records in the background. People would say, can I hear the latest releases? And we just put records on. And here's the thing.
You mentioned Sandy Sheldon.
Yes, I did. So there you go.
Q Prop 1.
Q Prop.
And that was her copy.
Yes. Yeah, so you told me. Amazing, man. Amazing. So a lot of these artists, we didn't know them. We didn't know if they had more than one record out. We weren't as deep into it at that point, but we just got them because we told Mr. and Mrs. Shapiro, just send us anything on that label that came out in that week.
Who were Mr. and Mrs. Shapiro? Were just a couple of people who you met? Or were they music people?
No, they were exporters.
I see.
They exported records from Florida.
Right.
And I think Dave is the one who found them. I don't know how he found them. He probably did some research and found them.
I see.
Maybe there was an added billboard. I don't remember.
Sound like a couple of people who run a sweet shop.
Oh, no. Well, I tell you. And they were husband and wife, Mr. Raul Shapiro, R-A-U-L, Shapiro, I remember him. And they were excited to be able to supply records to a shop in London.
So your partner, or one of the three partners, of course, was Dave Godin, a legendary figure.
Yes.
A guy who often noted as the man who coined the phrase Northern Soul.
Yes, that's correct.
He came up north to see what the heck was going on.
Yes.
So just in that moment then, we're talking 68, 69.
That's right.
The North must have been a buzzword, a buzz phrase in your store. There you are, in the Shaftesbury Avenue area,
right,
central London, and you've got customers from all over the place. But the hunger, though, the thirst for some of these records was clearly from the North.
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
To be honest with you, to be really truthful about it, I mean, Robert and I were really the ones who were selling the records. And Dave was there, but he would sell, it's only if we got very, very busy that he would also get his hands dirty, so to speak, to sell the records themselves. But he was there as kind of a presence. Some people knew who he was from his Tamla Motown days. But he's the one who noticed there was a consistent sound that seemed to be what people that were coming down on the Saturdays liked. Dave did notice the particular sound. So it was a sound. It wasn't just any old thing. And that's when he actually told Robert and I, on Saturdays, when you see people coming in, because you tell people from talking, the accents, keep playing the things that we're getting on these imports that have this particular sound. He told it, that he was very clear about it. He said, because you want to sell the record, the imports, you have to cater to your people who are coming in. It really was from the shop, record shop, noticing that there was a sound. Now, what I don't know, and maybe you can tell me, what was it about the tempo and what was it about the dancing? Because we didn't dance, I'll be honest with you, I would go to clubs in London, we didn't dance the same way people did to those records. Can you tell me? I don't know much about that.
My recollection, David, in terms of the way it moved into a much bigger phenomenon.
Yes.
In the late 60s, I found that everyone who went dancing to a disco, a youth club, would dance to pop hits of the day, and then mixed in. This is how I remember it. Growing up in the East Midlands, it wasn't uncommon to hear Mony Mony, Tommy James and the Shondells, and then hear the beat Major Lance, and go into a happening Tommy Neal, or some mod record by the Quick, Bert's Apple Crumble, or something odd, because. I grew up in what I call a jukebox town. I think there was a lot of northern towns that were like that didn't just religiously play on the charts, and I think people got interested in that. I think it probably all came from Radio Caroline and Luxembourg.
Oh, totally. That's really good you mentioned those, because they were very critical for soul and R&B fans in London as well, all over the place, because of pirate radio.
And
absolutely.
Like with your Soul City record store, you had to have a good record shop. And I think kids got hooked if there was a good record store in town. And there was where I lived. So, I was buying pop music. I was buying Loving Things, The Marmalade and things like that. But I was also... experimenting and, Shake Sherry by the Contours on Gordy. What the heck is that? I'll buy that. So I was buying all kinds of things until I realized what I really liked. I noticed then it had certain spikes. 1968, 69, I remember clearly a spike of what was to become Northern Soul, crashing into the charts, Harlem Shuffle, we spoke earlier, Be Young, Be Foolish, Be Happy, and these kind of things, the very up-tempo tracks. And then in 1970, that was another pivotal year, I think, for Northern Soul music, because 6 by 6 by Earl Van Dyke was out. And I remember that, if it wasn't a chart hit, almost, but one record I remember sold 0 in 1966, and it became a huge top 20 hit, was You're Ready Now by Frankie Valli.
Yes.
And that again came from the North.
Yes.
Without a doubt. Now, I'm not saying for one moment that people in London, by the way, weren't playing these. No. They probably were. But to be honest, I think most people didn't come to London. We couldn't get there for a start. A lot of train stations have closed down then, David, by the way. There's 2 other spikes which are interesting, and they dovetail quite nicely, although they've got separate meanings. So just follow me on this one. 1971, we saw the first ever, and to this day, the only ever original number 1, which was the Tams, Hey Girl, Don't Bother Me.
Wow.
It was number 1 in the pop charts. It came out in 1964, didn't sell. Typical Northern Soul story. And then I think it sold 500,000.
Wow.
So it was there in 1971. So you would think then, from that moment, that, wow, then if Radio 1 are playing it, they're going to play 50 Northern Soul songs. But they didn't do. But what did happen off the back of Hey Girl, Don't Bother Me, and the Twisted Wheel was closing. So that was the first real major club that we had up north that people had heard of. I know there were lots of other all-nighters bubbling around, but the Twisted Wheel in Manchester was known. I remember being at school and people saying, oh, my brother's just come back from the Wheel. Where's that? Where's Manchester? I lived in the East Mid. You take 4 buses to get there. So by 1972, there was this opening for something that was larger than the Twisted Wheel, and something that was Northern Soul complete. In other words, 100% Northern Soul. Although I didn't go to the Twisted Wheel, I know plenty of people who did, and as they often remark, well, we played generally R&B and soul, and then what was to become Northern Soul, these rarer records, like A Little Lovin' Sometimes, Alexander Patton, came into play.
Yes.
But by 1972, there was an opening for another major venue, and that, of course, was the Golden Torch. They had live acts on at the Torch, which was a plus, live American acts, and also they got a new playlist. Suddenly you could fly to America a little easier. You didn't have to wait for Mr. and Mrs. Shapiro. You could go yourself and say, well, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I've come with a bag of records. And look, some of them are great and they're unknown. So the DJs were playing a new level of rarity.
That's right.
A lot of them were great. I always think back to that time, David, that DJs in particular were almost like A&R men, because the songs from around 72 were very, very much geared towards a woman, a female.
Yeah.
Queen of Fools, Wanting You, they're a man, not a man like me. My Man Is a Sweet Man.
Yes.
These kind of songs. So both boys and girls were getting hooked. And then, of course, styles changed because everybody was wearing mod suits and stuff in the 60s. Then all of a sudden, this new uniform arrived of a holdall and a Coca-Cola and baggy trousers. And Wigan Casino was born. And then it took on a whole new meaning.
Yes. Any money we made from the record sales, from the record shop, I should say, got plowed into launching Soul City Records. Now, the first release was as far away from Northern Soul as you could get, which was Don Gardner and D.D. Ford. And I don't mind going on records that I couldn't stand it. It was a horrible record. I couldn't understand. Why are we doing the old? It sounds so old to me. But here's the thing. After that one, I think 102, if I'm correctly looking at the record label again, make sure I'm right here. 102 is Gene Chandler, which was much more in keeping with what the Northern Soul customers were already buying as imports.
So the North had an influence.
Oh,
then.
absolutely.
It had an influence.
Absolutely.
It was dictating your release pattern.
Well, to begin with, after the first one was whatever it was.
Yeah.
It was one of Dave's, you call that one of Dave's eccentricities to do the Del Gardner and D.D. Ford.
Yeah. And he was writing for Blues and Soul at the time, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yes, absolutely. Because it's 67.
Yeah.
And this actually, the label started, I've got to correct myself. The label itself started in 68.
Yeah.
So that's actually what happened. And so the second release, it was by then, I would say, definitely inspired by the demand and the interest from people who came from North. Absolutely. And the first few releases were more geared in that direction. Of course, there were some other things that weren't, like Go Now, Bessie Banks, and the Valentinos. These are things he really wanted to have out because they were the originals.
Yes.
But we were lucky to have Nothing Can Stop Me be a big hit.
Yeah.
A hit, actually a big hit,
yeah.
but it gave us money. All
did.
of a sudden, we got a little money, we have a pop hit. And I do have to say, Tony Blackburn was one of the people who played it on the radio.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was, we thought, oh, good, now we're really doing well. And then we have the first LP and so forth. Yeah. But the point I'm making is that definitely the label itself, as you say correctly, some of the releases were absolutely geared towards what had become, again, we didn't, by then it still wasn't called Northern Soul, it's called people, I don't know what we call it. Actually, I've got the magazine Blues and Soul where the first time Dave mentions it, he doesn't call it Northern Soul, he refers to it as he calls it the groove, the groove up north. That was how he referred it. In the actual column, he makes some reference to it, but that's the first printed reference to it. And I don't think we didn't call it Northern Soul. I don't know what we called it. We just called it, these are the records people from the North like. And at some point, that's how the term emerged.
And what a genre to have lasted.
I know.
And now it's in every corner of the globe, isn't it?
Well, I have never understood. I'd love to hear from you how it transcended just being music that was being played at the Wigan Casino, Twisted Wheel. And of course, by that time, it's now got the term Northern Soul has been coined by Dave Godin. But tell me, how has it become such a worldwide phenomenon? What happened? There's a point in time where it went beyond being, one could say, niche and became this worldwide genre. I could talk to people in America, they've heard of Northern Soul. Yeah. So what happened?
I think
how did it happen?
It's got several strands to it,
Please. I'd love
David,
to hear about
to be
it.
honest with you. Several strands to it. I think, first of all, there was a real treasure chest of music out there. For every Aretha Franklin single, there was 100 Aretha sound-alikes, and some of those had that Northern Soul beat, and that was great. That sort of moved on from the late 60s into the early 70s. The clubs bought into it.
Yeah.
It had a huge fan base of record collectors as well. They've driven it forward in droves. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They've also driven prices up too, so it's become a very expensive genre, which has also created a big interest in it for things that you can't afford. But I think also, and this is the most important part of it, people like to dance, and they've enjoyed the freedom of expression. They've enjoyed dancing to it. They've enjoyed bringing their friends into the arena to dance to it. If you mix all that with camaraderie, hugs, kisses, there's all that mixed in with this music. I mean, I've got a bunch of singles here, David, that are very touching towards the Northern Soul scene. One of them, I'm sure you'll know, back in the 60s, is Open the Door to Your Heart by Darryl Banks.
Loved it.
Now, it didn't sell here originally. No. So again, it's from the early days, the Twisted Wheel era. But again, it's a record that has stayed with. It's never gone out of fashion. It's still popular. It's still, you can see they're dancing to it differently.
Yes.
And it's not a case of them being in their own zone, but when they hear Open the Door to Your Heart, they're feeling something.
Yeah.
You know,
but bring us memories as well.
yeah, some records,
Yeah.
some records they're just bopping to, and I've got one here right now.
What's a bopper?
A track by Rita and the Tiaras called "Gone with the Wind Is My Love," and it's a very rare single. It's got a great chorus.
Really?
It's straight out of Supreme's Motown, but I don't think it's a song like Darryl Banks where they're feeling it. It's one where they're bopping to it and they're singing the chorus. It's got a great sledgehammer of a hook.
Yes.
So that's the bright sprinkle dust of Northern Soul, whereas Darryl Banks, they're feeling it.
Yeah.
One that I think I pulled it out earlier. You and I were talking about it because it's another one from your time. 7 Days Too Long.
Absolutely.
By Chuck Wood. Now that's it's a male record, really.
Yes.
I mean, it's not that ladies don't dance to it, but it's one of those. It comes out like a herd of elephants stomping through your front garden.
Yeah.
But it comes at you so much. It's almost like the man is the peacock. Just watch what I'm going to do to this. Chuck Wood, or I believe it's J.R. Bailey, actually, the vocalist, comes out, attacks the record full on. 7 days is too long. And the dancer, again with that Northern Soul spirit, matches it perfectly.
Yeah.
So Chuck Wood hits it with the left hand.
Yes.
The Northern Soul person comes right back and punches back with his right hand. And it won't go away.
Well, you know, I would say
another record that will never go away.
Now, I want to say something about that record, particularly because that was one of the first proper hits in the in Soul City record shop. We didn't release it, but I'm saying in the shop, when people say what was on the first records that people bought coming from the North that were really popular, and that was Chuck Wood and the ones we mentioned before, Major Lance, Billy Butler. These were kind of hits in the record shop. I mean, they were hits every. I mean, in other words, that I remember it very well because I don't think we could get many. Originally, it wasn't that easy to get. It wasn't a hit in America.
I think Big T released it eventually.
But in America, it was on roulette, and it was a kind of little.
It didn't sell.
It didn't sell anything.
It didn't sell.
The problem we had initially, again, as I go back to what we said before, is you couldn't get it. Once we had the first initial copies, trying to reorder it from the famous Mr. and Mrs. Shapiro was not easy because they couldn't get it. So that's a prime example of what we're talking about. You're right, but what's interesting as you were talking about the growth of it. I mean, I want to say something about one thing you said there that's really, really important, because I think what you refer to when you talk about Northern Soul, you talk about the camaraderie, the kind of way people, it's a whole, probably babies were born during the time of the Northern Soul. And I mean, families grew up. But here's the thing that's important, and I want to say this on record. It's not, I might get in trouble for it, but I'm going to say, because, I do live in London, and I am a Londoner, and I am from the South. But there is something that happened, I think, in the North with how people relate to each other. There is it is different. It's very different. And I think that has a lot to do with what people call Northern Soul, because it is really a different kind of way of relating to people. And unfortunately, I don't know what my neighbours in London are going to say, but there isn't that there. People don't necessarily know each other. I have friends in London, but it's
like the US London. It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah, and the thing is that there's something about that kind of connection that I think happened in the North that also contributed to what is called Northern Soul, because it really is more like a bonding. And when you said that, it kind of touched me, because I thought, we didn't have that in London. So that's an important element of what I think people call Northern, the whole movement of it,
I mean, there's another extreme here that I'm holding up by Jimmy Radcliffe called "Long After Tonight Is All Over,"
record, man.
And I think there was a few pregnancies after listening to that, because that's the song for Sunday afternoon.
Well, the thing you
after the all-nighter closed.
Here's the thing that's interesting about that too, is if you look at the credits, I'm sure you probably looked at the credits. Do you know who wrote that song, right?
Burt Bacharach and Hal David, of course.
So that was not like, there's no Dionne Warwick or Warwick Northern Soul classic that I know of. Yeah. But Jimmy Radcliffe, I remember when he came on television and did that song in Britain because he was a protege of Backrack and David.
Somebody
Loved that song.
Somebody once told me it was actually written for Gene Pitney, and he turned
It
it
probably
down.
was.
Somebody told me that. I don't know if that's true.
Well, probably.
It might have been Jimmy's son, because Chris is around.
Well, yeah.
I think it might have been Chris that told me that.
Because they were on the same label, musical.
Yeah. We've got hugs, we've got kisses, we've got people feeling good about each other, and camaraderie, friendships that hopefully will last forever. We've got all that on one side, and then on the other side, we've got different songs doing different things. So we've got 7 Days Too Long. Right, that's it. I'm Superman. I'm gonna do 10 cartwheels and 50 different acrobatics. And then when you land down and you don't break your leg, you then humming different tunes. You're feeling the spirit of that. Another one that springs to mind is "You're Gonna Love My Baby," Barbara McNair.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes, I do.
Again, that's very touching. It's very touching.
Yes.
So we've got all these things in a melting pot.
Yeah.
These Aretha Franklin, these Eddie Kendrick sound-alikes, basically wannabes.
There's now the books about Northern Soul. Yeah. There's been films about Northern Soul. There's documentaries. The Northern Soul at the BBC
problems.
But see that. What is it? I mean, we've talked about the origins of it. Talk how it really became such an important part of people's everyday lives. But what do you think it is about Northern Soul that has had it become such a global phenomenon and something that really is part of British culture?
Well, I think because we discovered it. You guys are the real pioneers in the 60s, saying, hey, this thing's going on up north.
Yeah.
We then, as Northerners, took it to new levels.
Yes.
But I think people have had time to sit down, digest it, look at things like YouTube, social media, and say, Northern Soul, what the heck is Northern Soul?
Yeah.
Which is exactly what we're talking about in this first episode.
Yes.
But once they start to listen to it, they're realising, crikey, this is good. Where the heck have these guys discovered all this stuff?
Okay. So the mystique about it, too.
Yeah, it's been a treasure chest, a treasure trove of, it's like somebody just saying to you, do you like music? Yes. Well, if you go in that box there's 1,000 items and you'll like every one. And you go, but they were never in the charts. That's one of the strangest things for me, being hopefully these days more of a pop historian, that hardly any of these records make the charts.
Nope.
You know?
You're right. You're right. Absolutely.
How do people get to know about them? But of course, that's transported itself now to all corners of the globe.
Yes.
Turntable hits, of course. That's another. I always say to a lot of my friends in the States who are doo-wop fans.
Yeah.
They've sadly a lot of their music, which is brilliant. You know, the street corner sounds.
Yeah.
They all huddle together and go out for a meal or go around to somebody's house to enjoy the vocals of the Dells.
Yes.
And of course, Brits in particular want to hear the Dells with something upbeat and up tempo. You see, and that's why they stay popular, David, because they're on people's turntables still. Whereas a doo-wop is an acquired taste.
Yes. You said the Dells, and I just thought of two records. I don't know if I think they classify as Northern Soul. There is.
And
wonderful.
The other one
is it Wear It On Our Face?
Wear It On Our Face.
Now, don't ask me how I remember those.
The biggest one is Run for Cover, actually.
Yes.
Run for Cover is the biggest one.
Yeah.
And of course, I think they're a group that even hardcore Northern Soul fans who are probably only collecting Northern Soul, they come in that category where you've got to have the Dells in your collection.
Yeah. Who would you consider to be, of the artists, the most prolific and successful person who's come out of the Northern Soul movement? I know that's a put you on the spot, but I'm curious. Who? I mean, we talk about Queen of Soul, we talk about, Godfather of Soul, we talk King of Soul, but who do you think is or the couple of artists you said these really were born out of Northern Soul movement, and they're relevant and they're still around?
I think I'll cheat, David. I'll cheat and say, first of all, it's not a person, it's a record label, and that is Motown.
Wow.
I think Motown was the trigger. It lit the touch paper. I think when very young mods were going to the first Twisted Wheel, I think it was over in Brasenose Street in Manchester. We're talking 64. They were playing Can I Get a Witness?
Yeah.
They were playing Heatwave. Remember, not hits in the UK. You remember that, David.
That's my first single I ever bought, Heatwave.
You know, I have older friends who tell me they went to extreme lengths to be able to buy The Way You Do the Things You Do, Temptations on stateside. Yeah. Because it was not a hit.
No.
And there was no, I don't think Caroline was probably just coming on the air. So I think sitting, listening to the Light programme and waiting for Cliff Mitchellmore to play it, you'd be waiting all day. But
label, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I think they were the very, very early signs that people had got an interest. For me, it was 68 because I don't remember 1964. Okay. Very easly. Okay. You know, I didn't grow up in a rock and roll household either. So my parents loved Ted Heath.
Well, my parents were like Ted Heath, but they had their own equivalent. Yeah. Go ahead.
But I think if you were young and if you were around 16 years old in 64, and you heard things like, if you heard records like Heatwave, Can I Get a Witness, You're a Wonderful One, Marvin Gaye, Stubborn Kind of Fella, none of them hit. Mickey's Monkey. Yeah. I'd say Motown is the real trigger to all this.
Well, it's interesting to say that because I have to credit Dave Godin, who we've talked about before, because it's founding the Tamla Motown Appreciation Society, which in itself was a big, that's a massive leap forward for the whole genre of Tamla Motown. And he was responsible for introducing a lot of those Motown records to people like me. I grew up in London, and the way I found out about Motown Vandel's Heatwave was through reading Hits for USA. They hadn't been to England or anything. So he really did, and it's so funny now I'm thinking about it. So he was the champion for Motown, and then he goes on to become, with me and Robert, the founders of SoulMusic. There's a kind of a through line there, which I never realized until you just said that. And Motown did produce a lot of records that were not, I'm thinking like Kim West and Take Me in Your Arms and Helpless. Would you consider those the forerunners of Northern Soul?
Probably. Helpless, definitely. Yeah. Take Me in Your Arms is a bit more of a hit, but Helpless, just a little misunderstanding, the contours. Yeah. These were
That's interesting.
So I would have to put it down to a label.
Rather than a person.
A label got it all started. Many artists, if you were going to put me on the spot with an artist who had really gathered momentum and ran with this Northern Soul genre, but with a Motown connection, it was Edwin Starr.
Wow.
Edwin Starr did more gigs in the North. He came to live in the North. He ended up living in Nottingham.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Really?
Wow. And I interviewed Edwin many times. And, from a guy, poor kid in Ohio, to Ed Wingate finding him and giving him Agent 00 Soul.
Yeah.
He was, I think his music was fantastic for what was to become the Northern Soul movement.
There's one other song I've got to ask you about. Yeah. I know we're going for hours here, but that's all right. I've got one more one. Because it was also, I remember Polydor in England did release Stopper on Sight and headline news on Edwin Starr.
Yeah, they did.
But they also released something called by a guy called J.M.O. Thomas called I Spy for the FBI.
It's huge, wasn't it?
Was that a Northern Soul record, you say?
Well, again,
retrospectively.
Again, it came out in 66, sold zilch in the UK. It was on a label called Thomas in America. So I think they released it because even at Polydor back in 66, they would have been feeling something, because I look at some of their releases and they did put out some very good soul records. So they were feeling something, whether it was from London or whether they were wired into the North, although it was very in its embryonic stage. Yeah. But by 68, I think, or 69, it charted. And I distinctly remember a guy who I grew up with, his elder brother used to go to the Twisted Wheel, and he'd bring records back. Yeah. And he brought a record that I couldn't, every time he played something, if I got the money, I'd go to the local record shop, which was a great store, by the way. and try and buy it. And I always remember he came back from the wheel with the Boogaloo Party by the Flamingos. Do you remember that?
I do.
The Boogaloo Party.
Was it, let me ask you, were it on
Now
Philips?
that took off like a
label?
rocket. Yeah, Philips. It
I
took
know
off
that
like a
song,
rocket in the north, that did. So much so that I think they released it in 68 or 69, and it charted.
Yeah.
And that, again, I think all these things were stepping stones
Yes.
to this greater stage
Yeah.
that Northern Soul's on now.
So how do you feel when you see it's become so massive?
Well, I'm very proud. I'm glad I lived through it. I'm not shocked at interest in the music because a lot of it is fantastic, David.
Yeah.
You know, it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, from about 71, 72, when you could get to America more economically.
Yes.
I mean, there were a bunch of record hounds who were digging deep.
That's right.
I mean, they were coming back, and we had such an influx of rare stuff, and since then it's got rarer and rarer and rarer, and still there's bits being
there's
played.
still bits being found.
Bits.
Wow.
You're not really going to find a Sandy Sheldon anymore,
No.
but bits and pieces. Or a right track, Billy Butler. I mean, that's the great thing about things like the right track, because that's bigger now than ever.
Really?
I mean, it was massive in 1969. It was massive at my school. We had a school disco on a Wednesday night. The science master used to play it. You know, we were looking and saying, he's got sugar here, the arches, and the right track, that doesn't compute. But anyway, yeah, I'm extremely proud of it. I think it's truly wonderful. I'm so glad that people have got the ability now to go onto something like YouTube, a platform, Spotify, and just hear it.
Yes.
Just hear all these different songs.
Yes.
And choose which ones are going to make up their playlist. I mean, I'm fortunate to have been, and you, when the very best records were there, you know, the Chess label and
Oh man,
Root Ticket. As you said, Brunswick.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's not many duffers
No.
from those
There were
great
not.
labels, were there?
Yeah,
Or if you had a package from Mr. and Mrs. Shapiro,
Yes.
and there was a bunch of Brunswicks and
Okay, yeah.
I'm sure you'd have been saying
The first one, yeah.
sold.
Yeah.
So, David Nathan, thanks for joining us, our first podcast, Northern Soul Time. A pioneer, if ever I saw one.
Well, can I also thank you, Kev, because I learned so much today in this conversation about what Northern Soul has become. And it's really great to see that you're still here sharing about, talking about, and I'm still here. I appreciate what I learned today. So thank you for having me as a guest.
A pleasure. We'll do it again.
Absolutely.
Coming up, Charly Records host the World Northern Soul Dance Championships at Blackpool Tower, November the 8th to the 10th. Hope you can join us for that. Hey, thanks for watching. See you next time for another episode of Northern Soul Time. To listen to some of the great music we've been talking about today, click the links below. If you want to buy great Northern Soul music, visit charlydirect.com.
Standing around, yeah. Please don't. That's what they'll be saying.